I'm delighted today to have Joanne Lockwood with me. She's going to be our next speaker in our dialogue series, which is on the 17th of June.
Hi, Tom.
Joanne's going to be talking about the importance of language. And we thought that we'd have a chat before the event to just give people a taste of what it is that we're going to be hearing from her and then looking at through the dialogue. So, Joanne, if I can go straight into this, how can you tell me, how can language exclude employees?
Yeah, I mean, clearly our choice of words, our actions can impact on people positively or negatively. I know that language matters to me. I'm sure language matters to you. If you address me or talk to me in a certain way, I can feel patronized. I can feel demeaned. It may be a source of microaggressions. If you talk to me another way, I'll feel included, I feel empowered, and I feel motivated. So what we've got to recognize is that often our choice of words, our tone, how we phrase, can have an immense bearing on how that message is delivered, and not just delivered, but the impact positively or negatively.
Thank you. It does seem such an important aspect, and yet it's so much of our everyday life, and yet we don't really think about it. So when you talk about inclusion and the importance of language, this is the case for any individual who may feel excluded, as well as any minority, whether they have a disability, they're transitioning, or come from a BAME background. So how can we ensure we get it right when there are so many elements to inclusion?
I think first of all, I would always say by being mindful, not, if you like, speaking through our own privileged lens, assuming that everybody will understand us. So I always consider myself mindful, speaking in a tone, a pace for people to keep up with, mindful that if we're doing video such as this or audio, that people can lip read, people can maybe, there's time for people to process what I'm saying. If I speak really, really quickly, then it's not surprising that some people won't be able to keep up and understand me. But if I really slow my voice down, keep it measured, give it rhythm, keeps people interested, keeps people focused. So I think the first step is being mindful, recognizing not everybody speaks or communicates in the same way I do. I mean, I've spent a lot of time, I'm sure many of the people who are listening and are watching into this will have spent time traveling in the world, being in cultures where English isn't their first language. And I spent many months working in Switzerland, working in Hong Kong, working in environments where English isn't the dominant language. And I realized what it was like to be excluded from conversations when I didn't speak German, when I didn't speak Chinese, when I didn't speak Spanish. So I'm very mindful now about creating English conversations where people maybe cannot keep up. I'm also mindful about the phraseology. When we think about cultural intelligence is not just about ethnicity, it's about the culture of disability, the culture of LGBT or queer people, understanding the language that matters to me and the language that matters to you. So I know that when I'm speaking to someone who is maybe a wheelchair user, I don't refer to them as a disabled person. I refer to them as a person with disability. So I'm mindful, but I'm also mindful that an autistic person is autistic first, person second. So some cultures around language, around communities, have different ways, even within the community, of expressing their identity. So it's about being mindful that we may not get it right first time, but knowing our fallback position is, oh, I'm sorry, understand our accountability. And that's something I'm going to talk about on the day, is around intent, impact, and accountability. How we can make sure that we go in with good intent, but we're mindful that our impact may not be as positive as we'd hoped.
Yeah, mindfulness, it is really so important, isn't it? I remember being abroad, and it isn't just Americans, but somehow they fit into that frame so easily, where they speak English or American, and when somebody doesn't understand them, they just speak louder. And I've seen that with the English as well. It's so easy to assume that because it's my language, it's somebody else's. And somehow there's this kind of arrogance that everybody should speak my language. And of course, what you're highlighting is how wrong that is and how different that is.
And of course, biases kick in where we assume someone's intelligence or lack of through their command of the language that I speak. If you're speaking to someone who is English is not their first language, or the way they speak English is not as defined as the way I do, that can have a huge impact on how we perceive them in terms of intelligence. And even when we talk about regional accents, in the UK, for example, we have people from the Liverpool area, Scousers, with that kind of strong Scouse accent. We have people who are Geordies from the Newcastle area who speak with a strong accent, and people even from Essex. That those accents are stigmatized and are often seen as less intelligent, less valuable, and that affects people in the job market, in recruitment, and in society. And there are constant microaggressions that exist by people taking the fun out of that language, by poking at it, or making assumptions. That stereotype effect. So again, accents, command of a language completely impact our perception of intelligence. I mean, I'm sure when I'm on holiday in Spain, people must perceive me as way less intelligent when I'm not able to converse in Spanish.
So moving on, you transitioned and talked very openly that this was an incredibly hard process to go through. If we take a look at transgender employees, which is one very important area for inclusion, what types of discrimination or issues at work are they still facing?
Firstly, this put it dead center that trans and non-binary people do face significant challenges in the employment process and in work. And it's not getting any better, according to recent surveys. So let's put that dead center. Often some of the challenges around pronouns, the he, him, she, her, they, them, etc. pronouns. And it's quite ironic, really. After 55 years of my life, I never realized I was going to become an English teacher and be talking about adjectives and pronouns in my later life. But here I am, talking about pronouns. And also adjectives, trans, how we describe people. Trans is an adjective in the same way that tall or short is. And so making sure that people are kind of aware that being transgender is not a verb. It's not an ism, it's not a condition, it doesn't have any past tense or future tense. So there's a lot of language around that, but often the problem exists where language is gendered in the workplace. And even recently we've seen articles around a train announcer addressing everybody as ladies and gentlemen, and how that caused some people to feel excluded. And there's been big debates on Twitter, on LinkedIn, around whether this is the PC brigade or the overly woke brigade trying to interfere in police and everyone's language. And it's sometimes if you take that slant at it, yes, it can seem a bit overly corrective. But what we've got to remember is who is feeling excluded, who feels less than because of the language used. And if it doesn't matter to you to change your language to the hello, ladies and gentlemen, hello everyone, or hello passengers, or good morning all, if it doesn't cost you anything to change, why would you want to say something where you knew that the impact on some people was negative? And this is where it goes towards trans people. Often we're trying to fit into this binary gender stereotype. And maybe some of these old gender terms like sir, madam, ladies, gentlemen, often get in the way. And if someone's presentation is ambiguous, not clearly within the gender binary, then by being more gender neutral, by making sure we don't use gender terms, we are going to be inclusive, not for just those gender diverse people, but also anybody that doesn't want to be called a lady or a gentleman or madamed. And there's plenty of people I know who don't want to be madamed.
Why is the language we use around sexual orientation and gender so important?
Well, it seems to be important to a lot of people. I mean, personally, I don't talk about it every 5 minutes, but unless I'm with other people. So it is important. We like to describe people, we want to put people in boxes, but also from my perspective and other, if you like, queer people's perspective, it's about recognizing our identity. We're straight and not trans has been the default in society for many, many years. So is it any wonder that queer people want to have their own culture, their own language? So to be able to identify who you are sexually or from your gender identity is immensely important for the community. In the same way that someone's ethnicity, which part of the world their predecessors stem from, is immensely important. And I think people value their heritage if they're from Scotland. They value their heritage if they come from Wales. So I think it's important that we value the way we respect that some people want to describe themselves in certain ways. And as I said earlier, it doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost me anything to say, okay, Joe, you like to be described as this. That's fine. I don't need to understand what it means. I just need to accept it matters to you. So yeah, it does matter, and labels are important. But I think, as the saying goes, labels are for baked beans, not human beings. And so we've got to be careful about how we label, how we describe people, because what I mean by being queer is not necessarily the same as what you mean or someone else means. So we have to sort of understand my interpretation of that language. And also, we often try and describe people in queer space using binary representations, so traditional heterosexual language, trying to put people into boxes. When we think of this just straight, gay, bi, but there's a whole gamut, if you like, spectrum of different identities, and each person fit within those.
What you're implying, of course, for those who are encountering this change in society, but they didn't grow up with it, what we're calling for, I guess, is an awful lot of effort to want to change, to want to be curious, to want to be conscious of difference. And my experience is that quite a lot of people find that really, really hard, because it's, well, I've worked jolly hard. Why should I have to do this? Do you come across that much?
Yeah, I think often people who have a certain amount of privilege often find it harder to adapt, because when you have a certain amount of privilege in your life, the world revolves around you. You don't feel you have to adapt. If you come from a background where you have significantly less privilege than the average in society, you're so used to fitting into the majority world that you're adapting on a daily and consistent basis, covering, passing, hiding, masking, whatever you're doing. But if you're, and I'm not beating anybody up here for being white, male, or straight, you tend to find that you don't think about your sexuality, you don't think about your whiteness, you think about your maleness. So you probably don't ever get to the point where you're discussing anything other than what you're doing next. But other people are always having to plan ahead, always having to think, always thinking about their faith, their ethnicity, their background, whatever it may be, as being different. Therefore, those conversations always occur. So I think, yes, people do resist, but often I would say that comes from a point where people aren't used to having to consider others. I'm not saying people are selfish. I'm not saying people are inconsiderate. It's just not a habit that people have developed. And certainly, I've realised since I transitioned 4 or 5 years ago, since one would argue, lost a certain amount of privilege that I used to have, I significantly noticed that I am more conscious about my place in the world, other people's place in the world, more inquisitive and more curious about people, because I want people to be respectful and curious about me in a positive way. So I've learned through this experience to be more accommodating, to be more curious, to be more understanding of people. Whereas maybe before, 5, 6, 10 years, 20 years ago, I was as guilty as everybody else, just going through life with my own lens, really, and unless someone bumped into me, I wouldn't have put any effort in. So yeah, I think it's about this shift in perspective around privilege, around maybe, I don't mean this in a negative way, but entitlement, not feeling the need to change.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think it's really helpful to hear you describe things in that way. What phrases or terminology should we really try to avoid that may inadvertently be offensive?
I think what we have to realize is that language evolves around cultures, around communities, and that is around ethnicity, it's around faith, it's around gender, it's around sexuality, it's around disability. Language does evolve. So I think we just need to be mindful that what was good language 25, 30 years ago isn't contemporary language today. We think about, we go back when I was at school, there was a collection box outside the newsagent for the Spastic Society. And that term spastic became pejorative. It became a word that was the name of a charity. And it became used in a negative connotations. So it renamed itself to Scope. And then people developed nicknames around Scope as well. So we can't stop people stealing certain phrases. So we have to be mindful. We also need to be mindful of gestures. You know, for example, in North America, I believe that the OK symbol, made with our hands, is now being sort of usurped by white supremacists. So when you think you're innocently making the OK symbol, for people from North America, that is seen as deeply offensive, deeply racist. So we can't get it right all the time. But we just need to be mindful that language has evolved and will continue to evolve. I don't have a guidebook for navigating this. It's just be aware, do some research. And if someone says, well, that may have racist connotations to some people, go, okay, I don't need to argue with that. I just accept that this word may be seen as negative to certain people, and I stop using it. It costs me nothing to change my vocabulary to do that. We also learn about the First Nation people from Canada and Greenland used to be called by a certain name, which I think was an insulting term, means eat raw fish, which is very, very demeaning. And now we use Inuit, which is a name that they identify by. And so I make it my business to try and avoid that old term, even when describing it, because I know it can be offensive to those people. So I think what it is just being mindful. And every time you learn about something, do the research, understand why it may be offensive, erase it from your copybook, if you like, and find a new word.
What needs to be done to protect, support, and to create inclusion in terms of language protocols at work?
First of all, what we've got to be careful is we don't create a culture where everybody is policing everybody. We want to create a culture where people understand their responsibility for good language and how you make other people feel. So that's the part of the culture, is instilling that personal responsibility for learning, development, for enrichment, for growth, to understand different people. Nobody wants to work in an organization where they're constantly being policed or picked up on their language. So finding a way of communicating with each other in a way that I would say, oh, thanks for telling me. I wish I'd known that. Thank you. Now I learned. So every person in the organization takes it as part of their responsibility. So I think that is one of the key things. It's evolving the culture so that it becomes a self-growth rather than a policing environment. But yes, we still need to have acceptable language guidelines, good language guidelines, what we should and shouldn't say. But we can do that in a high level. What is the company's stance on racism? What's the company's stance on homophobia? What's the company's stance on ableism, or whatever it may be? We have these big ticket, big high level. This is our policy of respect, policy of dignity at work. And this is the clear process. If you feel that somebody has repeatedly and consistently used poor language or been insulting or humiliating, wherever it may be, this is the policy we should follow. So I'm not a big believer in creating massive weight policy, but sometimes making sure you've got the framework so that people understand that if they persist in harassing, bullying, or causing someone to feel less worthy, then there is a process to deal with that. But we get used to having allies within the workplace, so that it's not necessarily me as a queer person always calling out homophobia. Allies will also stand up and call it out. I think it's also important that the company has a corporate allyship, so it stands publicly out there in terms of where it stands on anti-racism, where it stands on homophobia, where it stands on transphobia, beyond just the hashtags, but also being very publicly visible about what its customers, what its brand says about it in terms of that public persona. So yeah, think about it internally, but also think about the corporate allyship on a wider scale.
John, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much. And I really hope that's whet the appetite of those people who might be interested in learning more. So you're going to be on our next dialogue. It's the 17th of June. And for everybody, go to LinkedIn or go to Eventbrite and look for Serenity in Leadership. and Joanne Lockwood. And we're really, really looking forward to hearing you then and having the dialogue afterwards to see how people respond and what it raises for them, so that we can really explore this incredibly important and yet not very explored subject. Joanne, thank you very, very much indeed.
It's a pleasure, Tom, and I look forward to meeting you all and getting involved with the dialogue. Yeah, thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you.